Getting the smile and confidence you've been dreaming about, all from the comfort of your home, isn't a total mystery with Bite clear aligners. Just don't be surprised if all your friends start asking, "What's your secret?" Begin by ordering your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95. Bite clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces, plus they offer flexible financing, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
As a person with a very deep voice, I'm hired all the time for advertising campaigns. But a deep voice doesn't sell B2B, and advertising on the wrong platform doesn't sell B2B either. That's why if you're a B2B marketer, you should use LinkedIn ads. LinkedIn has the targeting capabilities to help you reach the world's largest professional audience. That's right, over 70 million decision makers all in one place. All the big wigs, then medium wigs, also small wigs who are on the path to becoming big wigs. Okay, that's enough about wigs. LinkedIn ads allows you to focus on getting your B2B message to the right people. So, does that mean you should use ads on LinkedIn instead of hiring me, the man with the deepest voice in the world? Yes. Yes, it does. Get started today and see why LinkedIn is the place to be to be. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th.
We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is director Keith Thomas, whose feature film debut, The Vigil, is currently streaming on VOD. Welcome to the show, Keith.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We both really loved The Vigil, and we'll get to it soon. But the choice of movie you picked is just it's perfect. But before we do kind of get to the now, how did you get introduced to horror?
Yeah, so I discovered horror pretty early. I think I was raised in a family that had a very morbid sense of humor, and I remember even as a little kid finding my mom would tape Far Side cartoons to the fridge, and
oh my God,
that sort of humor was just that was our thing. So I think some of the first horror, well, it was fiction, and it was H.P. Lovecraft, and I used to love going to the library and getting some of those old school horror anthologies. There were a lot of them directed at kids that just kind of told little weird stories. And I used to devour those. And so, I think for the same as a lot of people, I read short stories, then found King, and then Straub and Kuntz, and just worked through all that. And then my earliest horror film memory is probably Alien, when I was 10 or so. And that really opened a lot of doors, too, because then it was The Shining, and then it was, the whole rest of it. And then once the hooks were in, I was, hooked for life.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have a question. So you mentioned kind of the anthology books that were sort of like written for kids. Do you remember the book In a Dark, Dark Room? Or did you ever did you ever read that one?
Yeah. Yep. That was definitely a library one.
I loved that book, and I've told the story a couple times on the podcast. But my brother, who is 8 years younger than me, when I was in my teen, he found that book, and it terrified him so much he wanted me to throw it away, and I didn't. But I said I did, and then he found it later, and he thought the book had crawled back into his house. So those books, those books are, I think they're wonderful.
They're like a great gateway drug, and. Because it's funny because recently, I don't know if it's nostalgia or what, but I started looking for them again and kind of rereading some of the stuff. And the thing they do so wonderfully that I think books oriented to kids do almost better than ones for adults is the kind of the horror is purposely left vague in a lot of ways. Yeah. And so your mind creates a much scarier monster under the bed or in the closet than a story where a shambling corpse walks out and they describe it in minute detail.
Yeah.
It's not as great as what you could have invented. And those stories in a lot of those kids' books are just expert at doing that.
Yeah, I remember in particular in a dark, dark room, the story with the teeth, and the kid just keeps running into guys with larger and larger teeth, and there's like no explanation for it.
No, it's surreal.
It just is.
It's surreal. Yeah, and that's what makes it so much scarier because you're reading it and thinking, what does that look like? And you're picturing it in your head. And then, of course, when you're on the street, you're looking around and, I love that stuff. And so for me, discovering it was both scary, but there's like a thrill to it.
Yeah.
That's addictive.
I do, and I also think that we sort of like keep chasing that addictive thrill even as we get older. So what were a few of your favorites kind of growing up, either books or movies?
Yeah. So, in terms of movies, definitely Alien, The Shining, some of the classics. They're weird ones. I'm sure probably another guest has brought up Explorers, which, is like a kid's kind of sci-fi movie. But it has a really creepy buildup that is really unnerving. The reveal isn't, but, I just loved movies like that.
Yeah.
And then, once I'd kind of tore through a lot of horror novels, I went back to short fiction, and in particular, a lot of European short story writers, that were just sometimes not even necessarily horror, but in particular, there's some German ones, there's some French ones, kind of like in the late 1800s, who wrote these kind of very decadent horror ghost stories that are just creeping. They're just dripping with dread. I don't know. I love the atmosphere. Someone who builds atmosphere in a story, and just kind of because it becomes a little bubble universe you can kind of hang out in. And so I was always seeking that.
So, okay, you said that your first movie was Alien. Amazing. And aside from the movie that we're talking about today, were there any other films that were like really scary to you as a kid?
Yeah, you know what? It's weird. If it involved kind of a supernatural menace, they weren't as scary.
Okay.
I came from a very super rational kind of background, and my parents were scientists, and so that sort of stuff just didn't work as well as the stuff that really scared me in terms of like actually made me nervous and making sure the door was locked was serial killer stuff that was like very real,
grounded.
So those were the scary, but that wasn't for me. That wasn't as much of a fun scare. That was more like, oh great, the world sucks and I have to deal with this.
Right.
Yeah. So like Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer.
Oh, geez.
That movie, I saw that in high school, and that was just so unnerving and disturbing, but also just so depressing because it was like, oh man, these people exist, and I have to. We live in a world in which this happens, and that's more horrible than a clown inside the sewer.
Yeah, I just listened to the podcast about the serial killer who Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer is based on, and I was like, this is a real person in the world who did these things. And I recently watched Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, and I was very creeped out by it, and that made it even creepier, like hearing about the actual person.
for sure. And it's a powerful movie in that it's just so understated, and it's just so matter of fact. And that makes it, that much more frightening.
Kind of continuing with this, do you still have a kind of fascination with the serial killer, or like a fear of them, or is that something that has kind of changed over years? Because the reason why I ask is that you mentioned Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, and there's another movie that I saw recently last year that reminded me a lot of that, called Cold Light of Day, and I was kind of curious if like that's something that you're still interested in or not.
Yeah, I wouldn't say actively. I mean, I definitely went through a little phase where I was kind of, I wouldn't say necessarily like a true crime buff, but I was definitely reading the kind of true crime stuff. I always have had a deep fascination with Jack the Ripper, and for whatever reason, I've kind of kept that one is maintained, but it feels almost like from a different time. I mean, I know it was a very long time ago, but there's kind of a mystique built up around that one that almost pushes it into kind of a fictional sort of realm.
Yeah.
So I've kind of moved on, a lot of ways in terms of my reading or kind of what stuff I've been doing. It's just because a lot of it is just so disturbing. And I think a lot of it as well, once when I had kids, it was kind of like, you just become a little more sensitive to some stuff. At the same time, there was a film that I saw, it must have been 2019. I saw it at Fantastic Fest. It's called The Golden Glove. Which oh my God, that movie is a kick in the teeth, and then you swallow your teeth. It's unbelievable.
I still have to get up the nerve to watch it.
Yeah, it takes a lot of nerve. It's interesting because when it came out, it was just the critical response was just absolutely, it was vicious. It was absolutely vicious, which I think had a lot to do with his previous films being so different from this. But another piece of it is so authentic feeling. This is a disgusting person who happened to also be a horrific serial killer, and you are in his apartment, you are in his life, and you are watching him take people home, and it's so well done that you can't handle it. And so I don't know if that makes it amazing or terrible. It's really hard to tell because on a technical level, it's really, really amazingly made. But, just as a viewer, you're so repulsed by what you're seeing that it's tricky stuff.
I can't wait to watch it.
It's a good date movie.
Oh, yeah. I think, my boyfriend really loves gore. Just kidding. Surprise him. Tell him it's about like a fantasy movie.
Right. It's about boxers. Opposite. It's called The Golden Gloves.
He would really be excited about that one. So what are some of your favorite horror movies as an adult? Like what draws you to horror now?
Yeah. So now I'm really interested. I really like horror films that are kind of showing a world that I haven't necessarily seen before. That I really do. I really love international horror in particular.
Hell yeah!
There's just a lot of interesting stuff being made. I love Japanese horror, and not necessarily just the girls with long hair hanging in front of their faces, but stuff like Cure and.
Oh my God! Cure is one of my favorite movies of all time. Oh, it's so good.
Right. And there's another one that I love that unfortunately has just never gotten a proper release. I think there's like a VHS release from the 90s. Like it's called Angel Dust. And it's a Japanese horror film. It has the single best opening. This doesn't spoil anything, but it has the single best opening sequence. It opens with a guy who is leading his girlfriend into a cave. They're kind of not spelunking, but it's like a little path that's inside a cave, and they're going deeper and deeper, and he has a candle or a flashlight, and he's leading the way. It must be a flashlight. And they're having a conversation that gets it gets upsetting, and they're going deeper and deeper into this cave, and they reach a point of absolute pitch dark where they've gone through so many turns that finding your way out, if you don't know the way, it will be impossible. And he turns out the flashlight, and he leaves her in the darkness.
Oh my God!
That's the opening 5 minutes.
Oh my God!
And and you stay with her, So the screen is pitch black, and you're hearing her panic, and it's just, oh man, it is so intense. Yeah, pretty crazy.
Well, I would like to see it.
Someone, please.
I know someone needs to bring that out because
Come on, Vinegar Syndrome or Severin or one of your petite places. Let's go. So do you still kind of get that childhood fear that you watching movies as an adult now, or have you become jaded like Mary Beth and I?
Yeah, it's tough. Every now and then I'll have an experience, right, where I'm at a festival or something and I'll see something that just the mood is right and there's something interesting going on. For me, it's tricky now having, made a short and now The Vigil, to watch films and not constantly be looking at the technique. Yeah, I can tell what lens they're on. I can, I know exactly how the shot is working. I can see if they're, what's happening in post, and that's ADR'd, and I see what's going on with the color here, and it takes me out. And it's not so much the movie's fault as my own brain, but that has made it tough. But every now and then I'll have an amazing experience where, just the moment's right, and I'll just be sucked in, and I'll have that again, which is nice.
Do you remember the last time that happened to you, or what a movie was recently that kind of took you out of the analytical mindset?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, there's a early, it must be in the 80s. There's a movie called Parents that I don't know. That's one that does that, where, and it's funky because it actually has a lot of innovative camera techniques, and it's doing a lot of stuff, but I don't know what, it must just be some personal thing, but I watched that recently and I was sucked in again, and it was like, wow, this is working.
That's the one with Randy Quaid in it, right?
Yeah, it's Randy Quaid is like the 1950s suburban family that happens to be cannibals, and it sounds like a comedy, but it's totally played like a really disturbing horror film.
Ooh,
I saw that sometime in I don't know, high school or college, but it's been a minute. And I just remember...
It's worth revisiting.
Yeah, I just remember the poster art of the sort of she's making what looks like a turkey, and he's opening up the fridge and there's a skull in it. For some reason, that image is stuck in my head all of these years.
Yeah, it's got this kind of hokey sort of this cover, right? This kind of domestic scene that's kind of flipped, but it's it's actually directed by Bob Balaban, the actor. It's one of his only 2 movies he ever made. I don't know. He tapped into something really visceral, and there's some nightmare sequences when the son has discovered that his parents are eating people that they're unbelievable. They're shot with I think it drops from 35 millimeter to 16 millimeter, and it's they're really they're black and white and really distorted. It's effective.
Wow.
That's streaming on Prime. I'm going to have to revisit
there you go.
that.
Nice.
So you kind of, we talked a little bit about, you mentioned that your work on The Vigil. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about your debut feature?
For sure. So The Vigil is a supernatural horror film that is set in the world of Hasidic Judaism in Brooklyn, New York. And it is about a young man who has left the community for various reasons. And at the opening of the film, he is struggling. He's struggling to adjust to the secular world, to the outside world in New York. And he has been asked to return to the community to act as a shomer. A shomer is somebody who watches over a dead body before it is buried. It's a ritual practice that is relatively common in the Jewish community. And in the ultra-Orthodox community, the Hasidic community, there are people who are paid to do this. And so he's kind of hard up for cash, and he takes this job even though he doesn't want to go back to the community. He's going to go back, and he's going to sit the vigil and watch a dead body in a house for 5 hours. And he realizes, of course, when he gets there that he's not alone. There's something else in the house.
It's so good, guys. So Jewish horror is pretty rare. We know this. The Dybbuk is in a couple horror films, but it's more not necessarily around Jewish faith, but around the figure itself. So why did you want to tackle this topic in the horror genre?
Yeah, so, I had been screenwriting for a while, and I had made a short film that was a horror short film, and kind of that whet my appetite. And the response to it was such that I thought, okay, now I can really do my first feature. And, there's just this old adage in writing where it goes, you need to write what you know. And so I knew it was going to be a horror film, but it had to be something personal. It had to be something that I felt I knew that maybe other people didn't. And, even though my name isn't Jewish, I am Jewish, and I had studied, in fact, at a rabbinical school. I'm not a rabbi, but I studied at a rabbinical school, theology. In fact, my thesis in my graduate school was on monsters in the Torah.
Oh, so wow.
It was
That's
just always
so cool.
Yeah, it was just always my thing. So I figured when I sat down to write my first script in terms of a feature I would make a Jewish horror film, because I'd seen some films like you mentioned in terms of like someone finding a Dybbuk box and unleashing a Dybbuk, but they were never Jewish families that found the Dybbuk box. It was I wanted to immerse it in that actual world. And so once I had the idea of the Shomer and thought, wow, it's crazy that no one made a movie about a Shomer because there's somebody sitting with a dead body. It's kind of a perfect setup. Once I kind of had that, then it was time to kind of dig in and research, okay, so if we have this set up and there is going to be a supernatural entity attached to the situation, what's it going to be? Dybbuks are played out. You can't really put a golem into this sort of scene. So I kind of had to do some research and found the Mazik, which is also a very real, it's real from rabbinic literature. And so once I had all those pieces, then it became, just kind of fleshing it out, figuring out my characters, figuring out the themes of the film and how to tie all that stuff together.
That's amazing. And it's such a good twist on like the possession Catholic horror. And you've probably heard that a million times, but it is just so refreshing to have a possession-y religious kind of movie that's not just based around Catholicism and like God and the devil. So I really appreciated seeing a new twist on possession films that is like fresh and exciting and also like not so Christianity focused.
In some ways the goal was I wanted to make The Exorcist for Jews, but still have it be something that someone who's, let's say, atheist or knows absolutely nothing about Judaism could still appreciate in terms of the larger themes and scares and whatever. But growing up, The Exorcist was a film I always enjoyed. Particularly, no one ever talks about those first 30 minutes, really, but I loved those first 30 minutes where it's just, no dialogue, really, and it's just kind of the stuff happening in the Holy Land. But as a kid, I didn't necessarily understand Christian ritual or Catholic liturgy or the Latin or anything, but I got it. I got that there was a girl possessed, and they had to get the thing out. So that made sense to me, and so I wanted to kind of do the same thing. If you're Jewish and you see the Vigil, you're going to understand the prayers, you're going to understand the rituals, you're going to, have an appreciation for all that stuff. But if you're not, you can still just appreciate that there's a guy in a house with something scary. Well,
and that's that's the thing that I really appreciated about The Vigil, and it reminded me a little bit. I mean, it's not similar, but it reminded me of the Korean film, The Wailing, and the way it allowed us to see a different culture that was doing an exorcism or dealing with that kind of situation. But it was enough that we could either, if we knew a little bit about the subject, we could, press into it further. But if not, then it's just a really freaking scary movie.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought The Wailing up, because you had asked about modern or recent movies that I'd seen that kind of had that effect, and The Wailing is definitely one of them. The Wailing, it's like kind of an epic. I mean, it's over 2 hours.
It's so long, but it has
Korean so
films.
Many kind of, and I love Korean films, and I loved his 2 earlier films, and I was so excited for The Wailing, and it just really blew me away in terms of, there's so much going on in it. Not only are you seeing this exorcism scene with a shaman that is so different than kind of Western interpretations of exorcism, that it just felt so fresh and unique. But then his little take, there's a zombie scene that is played for comedy at first and then becomes unbearably creepy. There's just so many great aspects of that it was, The Vigil felt like an opportunity to kind of do something similar. It's like, okay, let's show something through a lens that maybe people aren't familiar with.
So I wanted to go from that topic and talk about the jump scares of this film, because
there's
they
some really
are
good ones.
such good jump scares. And I know there's always that debate about jump scares and everything, but I think the ones you had in this film were exceptional. I saw this at TIFF in 2019 the first time, and I was like, these are like the best jump scares, and they're earned. So I wanted to like hear from you about like how you constructed those jump scares, and like how you went about ideating and making those, and if there are any films that inspired how you created these jump scares.
Yeah, so I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear they work. Because jump scares are tricky. Horror is like comedy. Yeah. It's so subjective. There are people who love pratfalls, and there are people who like very nuanced, kind of dry humor that's based around dialogue. And, horror is the same way. Some people are, so totally anti-jump scare, which I don't... I find it hard to believe you could be a horror fan and not like jump scares, because it's kind of intrinsic. And anytime someone on the anti-jump scare bandwagon kind of says, well, look at this movie, everything they point to is a jump scare. So I don't get it. Exorcist has tons of jump scares.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when people talk about it, they're thinking about the unearned maybe jump scares, where it's like, oh, there's a cat, and that you're expecting to see like and someone just throws a cat in the screen, like, because I think jump scares are in some ways intrinsic to you want to build that tension, and you want to find a way to like release it, sort of like in comedy. So I completely agree. I don't want to tangent off of that, but yes.
Yeah. So when it came time to kind of make the scares for the Vigil, when I was writing the script, I wanted to kind of cover every single base I could. For the kind of more art housey, I wanted the subtler scares that were just uneasy and just kind of maybe just auditory or just hints or glimpses at things. And for more visceral scares, for like there's a certain scare in the basement that involves the TV.
That's the one that gets me.
So the subtler ones are they can be all done in one take, and they're relatively easy to just manipulating a few things. But the one in the basement is constructed in that there's multiple levels to it. So one day we recorded what is playing on the TV, and then we put it actually on a VHS tape and played it on the TV in the basement for Dave Davis to react to. And then a separate element is kind of what's going on behind him. And then you're building those two things together. It was funny when we were filming that sequence, this doesn't necessarily spoil anything, but, there is essentially the character of Yaakov it's very hinted very strongly for him to look behind himself, to turn around. There's something there. And so the way it plays is that he turns around very slowly because he doesn't want to see what's there. He knows there's something there. He doesn't want to see it. And it's funny, I got a little pushback when we were shooting it from some folks on set who were like, why doesn't he just turn around right away? Like, just look back. Like, just look and see what it is and run. And A, that's not as much fun. But B, it just, for me, I've definitely been in that situation. I know that feeling. And every time that has happened, I've always turned around really slowly. Right. Because you just, that, and you don't want to see it. And so I purposely was like, I'm going to make it even slower just for that. I'm going to have him turn even slower.
That is so funny because I was going to say, I remember that, like, I made a note specifically about, I love how slow it is. Like, you don't give us the satisfaction of like cutting right away. Cause like, you're like, oh, the jump scare is coming and you can prepare yourself. You're like, just kidding. You have to wait another agonizing second or two and then it happens. And I actually really enjoyed that. So tell them that it was worth it.
You see guys, it worked. Yeah. And that it's interesting too, because a scare like that, it's a scare. It's coming. Almost from the minute he gets down there that it's coming. But there's something delicious about pulling that as far as you can. Just like bringing out that tension and that moment. Because the moment that there is a jump scare, like when that is entirely reflexive. There's no thought in that. You just jump or you scream or you close your eyes. And that part is a release, that's cathartic. And I'm more interested in the leading up to that, the sort of when your mind is spinning because you're like, wait, what's back there?
Well, and I know that scene in particular for me was incredibly effective because I don't jump a whole lot anymore. We kind of talked earlier about kind of being jaded, and I can appreciate when someone's trying to scare me and get me to jump, but a lot of times it doesn't work. But the way that scene just slowly forced me to like anticipate it, where it makes your body, you talk a little bit about like response, it makes your body like tense up, you're like, it's gonna come, but you just tease it out a little bit more, and I love that. I loved it so much.
Yeah, thanks.
I knew it was coming, so I had to put my phone down because I knew I was going to jump. I'm very jumpy. Like, I jump at everything still, and I was like, I'm going to throw my phone. If I don't put it down, like, it's going to go flying into a wall.
Yeah, it's funny because when we were filming that scene in particular, you know, when you're on set, it just looks so different. Even if you're over at the monitor and you're kind of like, you're seeing the shot, you just have to think so far in advance in terms of the sound design and the color and kind of what you're going to end up doing, that, you know, there's a lot of times when you're filming that stuff that you kind of turn to your producer or whatever and you're like, oh, this isn't scary at all. Like, this is, you know, I don't know what we're doing wrong. And, you know, it's funny how it comes together later, and how kind of manufactured those moments are, as opposed to other scares where, you know, there were times on this film where both Dave and I were like unsettled and upset by some of the stuff he was experiencing, which is great, which is a great, you know, it's tough for Dave. It was exhausting for Dave. But it was, you know, it was so enjoyable.
He does such a good job in this, by the way.
Yeah, he's exceptional.
Especially since he mostly has to carry the movie on his shoulders alone. I mean, he has a couple people to you know, play off of, but for the most part, it's just him.
Yeah, you know, so casting him was I would say challenging in terms of casting Yakov, but the minute I saw Dave, I just knew. It was weird because I saw him in a movie called Bomb City where he was playing a punk rocker in Texas, and he looked completely different.
Wild.
But I could just tell. I could tell two things. Number one, my Judar went off, and I was like, that guy's Jewish. I knew it. And number two, he just had this emotional thing that he wore on his face that it was just, you could just read him like a book. And I thought, that is what I need. I need somebody who can wordlessly give us this fear and this tension and this anxiety and this sort of guilt and the, you know, this PTSD and stuff that he's suffering without using words. And especially since, like, the camera's living on his face for most of the film. And you know, I knew he was going to be great, and he just really just blew me away. It was just such for him too, it was a very sort of emotional, kind of very deep-rooted experience, and he brought so much to the film. You know, he didn't know any Yiddish, for example, before he showed up on set. I didn't know Yiddish either, but he just learned it all, and he internalized it, and the accent he's using is a very specific accent to this neighborhood. So it was amazing. Yeah.
Terry, did you want to ask a little something?
I just had one question. If you can tease a little bit about Firestarter.
Oh, sure.
If there's anything you can tease or mention, I know that it's probably still a little bit on, but
yeah. So, I mean, I can say this. You know, I had when we talked about kind of discovering horror as a kid and genre, Firestarter was one of the first Stephen King books I read. Oh yeah. And so. You know, when I had a meeting with Jason Blum, and he had seen The Vigil and loved The Vigil, and it was kind of one of those moments where we're talking over various projects, and kind of I'm thinking in my head, okay, you know, if this goes really well, maybe he'll bring up a project that I might be interested in, and that'd be cool, and let's see. And I had no idea what it might be, but there was this great moment where he had left the room for a little bit. I was talking to somebody else at the company, and then the door kind of swung open, and he kind of slid in the room like Kramer, and he was like, Keith, I got it. He's like, Firestarter. And of course, I was, you know, super excited because, you know, I had loved that book, and then I read the script by Scott Teems, who wrote Halloween Kills, and It was amazing. So what I can say about it is, if you love the original novel, I think you're going to really love it. If you like the 80s film, I think you're going to like it too. It's different. It's very close to the book, but it's a new take on it. And for me personally, what I was exploring in The Vigil and what I liked most about The Vigil is this sort of visceral, tense, raw kind of emotional experience that we were putting Dave through, and that that is also in Firestarter in the sense of a family on the run, a family under fire, no pun intended. Where you're how do you parent a child who could melt someone's face off if she gets really upset, and then how do you put those people on the run and they're being hunted down by the shop? I can say that, if you want to see a Firestarter where you're going to see people, have their heads burned from the inside out, you're going to get that. If you also want to see a Firestarter where you have this really rich emotional story of parents and a child who, is very special and incredibly dangerous and navigating those sort of emotional waters, you're going to get that too. It's a very powerful script. I was blown away with it the first time I read it, and then working with teams, kind of bringing, my own vision into it. It's in a really great place, and we got a pretty amazing cast. Zac Efron's been announced as Andy.
Yeah.
And he's going to be absolutely amazing. I think people are going to. You're going to see a Zac Efron that you've never seen before. So it's going to be really exciting.
That's awesome.
Cool.
I'm so excited.
Cool. So Keith, we've talked about like your horror past and The Vigil, but what movie are we talking about today?
So today we're going to talk about Dario Argento's Phenomena.
Yay.
Yes.
Okay, so for those of you who have not seen it, please watch it. It's on Shudder. But here's a quick synopsis. So Jennifer Corvino, played by a young Jennifer Connelly, a young girl with the amazing ability to communicate with insects, is transferred to an exclusive Swiss boarding school. But someone has been killing the students, and it's up to her, a chimpanzee, and an entomologist to save the day.
It sounds so ridiculous, but it's so amazing.
I mean, it is like really ridiculous, but in the best way possible. So Keith, tell us all about when you first saw this movie, the effects of the movie on you. Like, paint us a picture.
Give us your
of
horror
your experience.
story.
Yeah, give us your horror story on Phenomena.
Yeah, so Phenomena. I know it's a weird one in terms of having this sort of scarred for life kind of experience with, but I saw it when I was probably in 8th grade. So this was like early 90s. And I was in England with my family. And my brother and I had discovered that UK television had nudity, which we couldn't believe. It wasn't so, you didn't need cable. Like, it was just on TV. Right. And so we were in the hotel room and we were flipping channels. And we stumbled across a TV show that to this day, I don't know exactly what it was, but it was about Italian horror films. And this TV show, we only caught a bit of it, but the bit we caught were the final 20 minutes of Phenomena.
Oh, wow.
Right. And if it's just the final 20 minutes, it's like the most surreal and strange and scary thing. So I saw it, and I just was trying to get my brain around it, what I had seen. And it just really, really got me. It kind of, it left me sleepless, especially with, I think it began, the way the clip played out, it was kind of the telephone dropping into the whole sequence. And then the pit of bodies, followed by, the whole running outside and the little kid on the boat. And then, of course, the infamous chimp. And just all those things. It was crazy to think, this is all one movie. How is this one movie? But then so much of it was just, it was so well made, of course, as Argento stuff is, so beautifully shot, that even then, even as like a 13-year-old kid, seeing it, I was aware of the score, the cinematography, the color, the lighting.
Yeah.
Just all working together to create something that I hadn't seen in like an American horror film. It was beautiful and fascinating, but also really ugly, and very violent. That,
yes.
So yeah, it really disturbed me. And then I don't think I actually saw the film until high school. It was, of course, in Europe, it was known as Phenomena, and here it was
right.
An 82-minute cut. It had like 20 minutes cut out of it. And it was called Creepers, and I saw I saw it as Creepers, and I finally saw it like a sleepover. We rented Suspiria, and then Creepers. But it was one of those things where after I'd seen it, it just stuck in my head, and I was like, I have to find this movie. I can't believe this sort of stuff exists. And weirdly enough, Phenomena is a uneven film. I guess you could say it definitely is goofy in a lot of ways, but at the same time, something in it, and I really do trace it back to Phenomena, something in it really kind of burrowed itself into my kind of creative vision, in that, it's funny, I was talking to somebody recently in the film industry who had just watched The Vigil, and one of his comments was, "Oh, I could totally see the Argento in certain shots," and I was like, "Wow." It's just not even intentionally doing it, but it's just there, and it comes from seeing Phenomena.
Wow.
That's amazing.
My mind is going in a million different directions. The first thing is that what an amazing double feature for a slumber party, Suspiria and Phenomena.
Yeah, especially when you hadn't seen either of them, really, because we didn't. And I remember at the video store, we rode our bikes to the video store, and we got Suspiria, and weirdly enough, the box was just some poster art, and it had like no pictures, but we picked it up. Yeah, so we had no idea what we were in for. And then you watch Suspiria, it's mind blowing. And then to follow it up with finally seeing Creepers, seeing the thing that I had seen pieces of, it was an unbelievable night.
That's such a fancy kid night too. I feel like no one my age should have been let's watch Giallo.
Let's watch Italian horror.
Right. What's weird about it is none of us were fancy at all. We had, I'm sure we had just before it, we rent like 5 movies, and I'm sure the 3 before it were some Friday the 13th movies, right. And then, like Project Metal Beast or something something like that. So it was funny, but you could feel it when we put on the Argento. Suddenly, things just shifted and felt as though we were in more rarefied air. It's like, wow, this is something different.
So the other thing that came in my mind was that I wanted to ask, when you saw it, if you were, because when we were talking about this, the PR person sent forward a little bit that you had saw like the clip in the UK. And so I was curious if you had seen the film in the UK or if you had seen it over here in America because of the Creepers cut. Right. And my thing is that when I was a kid, I remember walking into a video store and seeing this VHS tape of this little girl holding her hand out to us, just like covered in insects, and there's a huge swarm behind her, and it's called Creepers, and the log line is like, Jennifer has a few million close friends. And then earlier on the bottom, it's like, it will make your skin crawl. And I remember seeing this image and it like really affecting me, because I asked my parents if I could rent it, because I was obsessed with Jennifer Connelly at the time, because I loved Labyrinth. And so my expectation of it was like, oh, it's Labyrinth, but this girl she looks evil. Like, she's holding up insects. This can't be a good thing. And the cover was too evocative for my parents, who wouldn't let me rent it. But this image has stayed with me for so many years. And then fast forward to about 2018, and I was listening to a podcast, and they were talking about Phenomena and Italian horror. And I was in this stage where I was collecting a lot of, and I still do to this day, it's become a huge habit of like collecting physical media. And so I had bought this because Synapse, one of the boutique Blu-ray distributors, put out a steelbook copy of Phenomena. And so I ordered it right away, and I'm sitting there and I'm looking at this cover, and the front cover is just the Phenomena cover, but the back is the Creepers art. And it was like this moment of, what? I didn't know what the movie was called. I couldn't remember that it was called Creepers, but I just remember that image of that kid. And it's amazing to me that this movie could be released in the United States as Creepers, where everywhere else it was called Phenomena, and it was an almost 2-hour movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and cut down completely. It's. I mean, I had a very similar experience in that I had seen that cover as a kid as well, and then finally that one slumber party rented it and saw the rest of it. But I also am a big physical media guy and have that Steelbook and the other the Synapse releases. And, it's interesting. I don't know how many times I've seen Phenomena at this point, but it's weird how that first, it's always that first one that kind of hooks you. And it's weird that it's this one because I love so much about Phenomena, even though so much of it is goofy and some of it doesn't really work, and there's so much stilted kind of dialogue and stuff going on in it, and it just has so many ideas. There's another screenwriting saying about you don't have a unicorn and a UFO in the same movie. It's like, but Argento was like, no, you got a fucking unicorn, a UFO, and Bigfoot, because that's Phenomena. I mean, it has everything in it. It's got all his Suspiria stuff. It's got all his Giallo stuff. It's a mashup of like Deep Red and Suspiria and all this stuff going on. And obviously some of it works, some of it doesn't. There's so many places where you're kind of chuckling because you're like, what is going on? Like one of her sleepwalking antics out on the ledge.
I love this scene. The scene
where she falls.
Yes, she sees the murder. The poor woman is running, screaming, bloody face, smashes at the glass. Again, this is the second glass smashing we get in this movie, and then gets stabbed through the mouth. And Jennifer Connelly's character falls off the roof, gets hit by a car, jumps out of a moving car, just rolling down a hill like this woman.
Yeah, and then she gets saved by some ladybugs.
That I love that when she picks up the ladybugs and you see that their little creepy eyes, which is hilarious.
Right. It's like the bug vision view of her because they're kind of in love with her. And even just that for me, one of the most so obviously the last 20 minutes are so memorable, but once I saw the film, and the one thing that I always love revisiting is the opening. It not only has this amazing score by Bill Wyman,
oh my God.
This sort of very kind of atmospheric whistling sort of score, but it has just this beautiful wordless sort of setup of, it's Dario Argento, one of his daughters, who's wandering, who got left behind by a bus and is wandering and comes across this house where we get these intercuts of something chained up and is breaking the chains before it comes POV style for her. And, of course, that's where you get the other breaking glass and this decapitation into a waterfall. It's just so, that he was just at the height of his powers with this thing. And it's just, from the Steadicam and crane shots, it's just so well made.
Mary Beth, I know you saw this recently because we watched it for Little Cuts, but what was your reaction first time watching this?
I was so excited because I knew that there was a monkey with a razor blade and Jennifer Connelly and bugs. So I was very excited. And so, Keith, I am very new to Giallo. This year, I have been diving into Giallo full force. So I was not as familiar with Argento's work, but this is kind of earlier-ish in my whole journey with the genre, and it blew me away. I know this is such a different Giallo than a lot of other ones. There's supernatural elements in this one, and they're in the countryside, and it's a little bit more of a subversion of the Giallo, but I loved every second of it. It's obviously got flaws, and it's goofy, but I love that Argento was just I don't give a fuck. I'm just going to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, and we're just going to go with it. We got a pit of bodies. We've got a mutant kid in a basement. We've got exploding boats. We've got clouds of bugs at multiple turns. It's gonzo. It's just absolutely ridiculous, and I love it so much.
Yeah, and it's played so straight in that, I'm sure someone said to him, Like, wait a second, the hero in this film has a psychic connection to insects, and he's like, yep. And there's like no, there's no question about it. It's just, yeah, that's exactly what happens. And the best thing is it's never explained. No one gets into it. She didn't fall in radioactive waste and get this power. She just has it. She's just there, and it's also something that really hasn't affected her life until now, and. Then he just builds on that. So then you get the scientist who's studying the sarcophagus fly, who's obsessed with finding out who the serial killer is, and just happens to have Inga, this chimp. And the chimp gives an amazing performance. And the other thing that, when I rewatched it, because we were going to talk about it, the other thing I was realizing is the chimp has an amazing story, because the chimp has not only tons of setups and payoffs that are great in terms of, like, in the opening scenes with the chimp, you see her playing with a scalpel, and the doctor is like, no, don't touch the scalpel. And of course, that's going to be, it's just like Chekhov's gun.
Chekhov's scalpel right there.
It's going to come back. But what's great is there's this whole B story about the chimp's vengeance. And there's that beautiful scene with the chimp who's like a homeless chimp now, who is in a park, who's like eating out of a trash can, and you feel so bad for this chimp. And then she finds that straight razor, and you just know, you're like, oh shit, this chimp is going to slice someone's throat. And when the chimp shows up at the end, it's like a cheering moment. You're just, it's just so great.
I also love when Inga jumps on top of the car when, like, the person is driving away, and it's like it's so sad because she's like trying to rip the slats off the window, and then
I know, it's all rough.
Out. That whole sequence is you said it's sad because you have poor entomologist coming down the chairlift and coming down into the knife pole that the killer is positioning while this poor monkey is trying to get in. And I don't know what they did to make the monkey, but the monkey looks incredibly desperate trying to get into that house.
Wild.
I think the ASPCA was definitely not involved. I mean, that chimp seems pretty upset, that she's tearing apart the window. But it's interesting. I was watching, there's a little behind the scenes thing that I saw where you see Donald Pleasance, who's the doctor. He rides right. That whole sequence is clearly, Gento was like, how do we do a cool murder with one of these wheelchair, stair escalator, things. And that's why he set it up that way. But, when in this behind the scenes video, you can see Donald Pleasance come down the stairs and they stab him in the belly with that thing. And they stab really hard. It's a kind of a crazy thing to see behind. And, Argento himself is the one who always wields the blades.
Right.
It's such a crazy psychology kind of going on back there. But
wait, he does?
Yeah. It's always his hand as the killer's hands.
Huh. That's
I don't know what that says, but, so for example, at the opening in the movie where you see the girl, she's stabbed multiple times before her head breaks through that glass. That's Argento's hands,
and that's
stabbing his daughter. Yeah,
that's something that I think psychologists would have a lot to say about.
That's very weird. Anyway,
but I love that sequence pays off with surprise. There's a monkey on your car. Like that's like the thing that you're not expecting to see. The killer's driving away and. Poor Inga. And it's sort of a playback of what happens to Jennifer earlier on, where she gets in the car with the two guys and she ends up rolling down the hill, and poor Inga gets like thrown off the car. So it's almost like here's another connection to, here's selling this as another one of the protagonists.
I did think the chimp was the murderer at first.
Oh, right. Like a murders in the Rue Morgue kind of thing.
I thought the chimp was going to be the one that was killing everybody. I was like,
that would have been cool too.
That would have been cool. And
I did, the other thing that I like about the film is the whodunit aspects are pretty good in that I think she, I guess it's spoilers here, but
we're
full
all of it.
We're full spoilers.
The fact that she's revealed as the killer is it's surprising, and then the whole kind of weird sort of thing with her son. And it's funny that it really takes that turn in those last 20 minutes where it just becomes this, and then the music choices are also another such a weird aspect. I get it. I get it what he's doing. But, there's that amazing cut between Donald Pleasance's body when it's being like brought out. And is it Motorhead? Then all of a sudden it's like a Motorhead song.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, okay. I have a question to ask really quick. Who was chained in the house at the beginning? Was it the son?
It was the son.
It was the son? Okay. Just wanted to make sure. I sometimes like with Giallo, sometimes I lose threads of like who is who and what is what. So I needed to ask a silly question.
No, it's totally understandable because a lot of them, right? A lot of that stuff is it's kind of opaque and they really don't clarify. It's the rare Giallo that you can really truly follow the first time you see it.
Right. Very true.
Right. You kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, Keith, where in some ways this movie is Argento firing on all cylinders, where he's merging his Giallo beginnings with the more mysterious and like supernatural elements of that he would go explore in like the 80s and with Suspiria and that kind of movie. But what I loved is that you have this okay, let's talk about the ending. So what we have here is we have this ending that is set up almost like his Giallo endings, where if you look back to The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, or you look back to Deep Red or Tenebrae, where there is a killer reveal, but then it just continues from there, and there's another reveal towards the end. And so the way that this movie takes the sort of mystical Suspiria element as well as his sort of Giallo element, especially with the ending, is I think is really fascinating to see him kind of bring it all together in this film.
Yeah, I agree. It's and it's interesting because I think where the film is a little uneven is certainly in the the first half of it. Mm-hmm. But by the time what's fascinating is he pulls these threads together, even though they're pretty disparate, in this ending, which becomes it's almost becomes this heightened surreal thing. Like this house they end up at, that's her house where she's living with her son, isn't the house obviously we see in the beginning. It's a different house. And yet somehow this house happens to have a giant hole in the floor that also has a telephone with the longest phone cord in existence. And there's no explanation for it other than, of course, it needs to be long because it's going in the hole, and she's going to go in the hole after it. And then you get to this torture chamber basement scene, which, it's very similar to the pool in Poltergeist with all the bodies.
Yep.
But this one is like grosser. It's like it's the fact that there's so many maggots. It's just he's just amping it up. And then it was interesting. I was rewatching it. I was rewatching one particular scene again just yesterday, which it's interesting because he does all these little reveals that she's the killer and that there's a detective in the basement and the son has this horrible deformity and he's been killing people. And then you get out on the water, and of course the boat explodes, and the bugs tear off the kid's face. But then you get this moment where the boat is burning on the water, and she emerges all in white out of the water and she's reflected, and it is just such a striking, beautiful composition with the flames reflected in the water, and then the music by Goblin going on, and there's this light that kind of maybe it's moonlight, who knows? It's kind of coming out of nowhere. And it's so amazing to me that in the midst of this chaos that he's created, this sort of very surreal, over-the-top, ultra-violent kind of chaos, that he inserts this incredibly beautiful moment that clearly to shoot what he did there takes a lot of setup and is a lot of work. And it's amazing how he placed it in such a way that beautiful, very serene kind of painterly moment is followed directly by a guy getting his head cut off with a piece of metal, like a sheet of metal.
Oh,
It's
yes.
just
Okay. I had forgotten that happened, so I was like, okay, cool. Like my favorite is like the cuts back and forth of them running
Right.
to each other, and I was like, something's
like in
about to
slow
happen,
motion.
and then and then all of a sudden Daria Nicolodi is just like, I'm here. Sheet metal.
Yeah,
I love that it was sheet metal.
decapitates somebody with a giant. That's like a 4x6 sheet of metal.
Huge.
It's huge, and also I guess I never thought it would be that sharp. I guess I don't know much about. I don't know much about sheet metal. I guess
Who knows? It was just washed up on the beach, or maybe she brought it with her. That's like her weapon.
She's just like running down the road holding a piece of sheet metal.
It's such a great gag too, because it's just that cut.
Gag.
And then, of course, you have like the creme de la creme of her like trying to chop off Jennifer Connelly's head with the same sheet of metal, and then
it's all of a sudden a little harder to do.
The chimp like. And it's so great how he films the chimp. She emerges from below frame. She like comes up into the light with that straight razor shining in the moonlight and just starts wailing on her. And it's amazing because it's clearly the chimp doing it. It's not like a puppet chimp hand with it. It's the chimp like cutting her face with a obviously dulled razor. But oh man, that's so effective.
It's such a vicious ending to the film. Like the last bit of this film is just so amazing. Like you kind of talked about it, where she's coming out of the water, and the way everything just sort of unfolds. Like right after that, you think, okay, we're done, we're ending it, and then boom, no boom, and this vicious ending with the chimp. It's really kind of gory.
yeah, it's gruesome and then. It's almost like Argento, he had those sequences in mind. He shot them. He got what he wanted. And then as soon as that's over, he's like, okay, movie's over. And then the credits just start rolling. He's like, all right, I'm done. There's no resolution. It's just like, okay, that's it. I got what I wanted. And there's just something really effective about it.
I want a sequel where it's Jennifer and Inga solving crimes using bugs and her chimp intellect.
Right. She's got a little hat on and her cornpipe. And she rides on top of the cars.
And then Jennifer always has a sarcophagus fly, just like in a glass container on her side.
The sarcophagus fly.
Yeah.
That his plan for her with the sarcophagus fly is just one of those things that's like, this is so silly, but we have bought into this at this point that we're just gonna run with it. But the image of her in the bus, just like holding this little fly in this container, waiting for it to start like flipping around and going crazy, is so surreal and unreal that it's so funny. Like I gotta imagine if this were real life and this little girl just came on this bus and is sitting there with this big box with one little fly in it, what are the people around her thinking?
Yeah, especially since the other thing I was thinking with that scene is the fact that like Donald Pleasance sends her, is like, you can find the killer, just use this fly. Who sends like a teenage girl with a
little girl
with a death fly to find a serial killer? Like, and it's so weird. And I love how she really has no idea where she's going to go. She's just taking this bus, and it just happens to go into the Alps where, it senses this house and the bodies that are buried there. But I know it's funny because you would think it's dream logic, and it's kind of like that they're going for something that is clearly fantasy. But I bet if you asked Argento, he'd say, no, this is real. There's not dream logic. This is A, B, C. This is how are you going to find the killer? You got a death fly. That's how you do it.
Sorry, just like, duh. This isn't supposed to be like an allegory or any kind of symbolism. It's just she's got a fly and she's going to sniff it out.
Yeah,
duh.
And it kind of if you think of it that way, I guess it works. That's that makes sense.
It's like a little dog. It leads her right into the house. Like she just is following. It just is so. It's almost cute.
Timmy's picked up the scent. Go, Timmy.
Yes, right. Here we go. Yeah, and it kind of waits for her. It's like hanging out, waiting for her to catch up, and then the other stuff he has in there. Right, there's lots of riffs on Suspiria in terms of the boarding school and the girls being nasty to each other.
Oh my!
And the headmistress that is like antagonistic to her from the very
right.
beginning. Like, what did she do to you that all of a sudden, before like any of the weird stuff starts to happen, you were just being a total dick to her?
Yeah, I love how there's that moment where I can't even remember what they're doing. They're like measuring her brainwaves or something. They have her with a doctor, and they're like examining her to make sure whatever. And the takeaway from the headmistress is that she's the devil incarnate.
Yes.
Because she speaks to flies, she must be Beelzebub.
Right.
It's such a little throwaway moment.
She talks about how Beelzebub in the Bible is the Lord of Flies. Look at her, the Lady of Flies.
Yeah, it's like they're going to burn her at the cross.
It's a good thing that she did get out of that school, because I'm pretty sure that is what would happen eventually.
Yeah, I know, right? That could be a whole nother movie they were setting up. It's because it feels like he's taking so many different ideas and mashing it into this one movie. In terms of like all these, maybe leftover Suspiria stuff, or who knows where it came from. But I think at this point he was right. He had a lot of success. He could kind of go for broke. No one was going to tell him what to do, and so he was like, "This is my epic. I'm making this thing," and and I love it for that.
Well, and like soon after the whole like harassment by the kids and being like, you can see mosquitoes and like talk to mosquitoes. My favorite scene is when when Jennifer has all of the bugs swarm the windows and she just calmly goes, I love you all. And like she just is sitting there with like the wind behind her hair, and she's just so calm, and there's just bugs everywhere and everyone is freaking out. And I love that scene, and also is such a testament to Jennifer Connelly being a really talented actress at such a young age. This is like her second movie, like casual working with Dario Argento in her second movie.
Well, in her first movie, it was Sergio Leone.
Right.
Whatever. It's cool.
You see interviews. I've read some interviews with Jennifer Connelly, particularly about Phenomena, and she says she absolutely loved it. Like she had the best time ever. And I guess I can see why.
Yeah, I had a quote from her in an interview, because I went looking for an interview, and she was talking about working with Sergio and Dario, and she talked a little bit about her Once Upon a Time in America, and then she said, talking about Sergio, he was very sweet with me, as was Dario Argento on the set of Phenomena. It was a gory movie in which my character fell into a grave full of corpses, but I had a great time.
And she was, how old is she, like 14? 15 at the time?
Gosh, she had to be really young. She was born in 1970, so yeah, she probably would have been.
This was
about
85,
15.
15 or so.
14 or 15, yeah.
What's it like to be so talented at 15? Like,
and
what?
It's interesting because he makes her so ethereal too. I mean, she's in white like the whole time, and he's always hitting her with wind in her hair. So she's always, and she has. It's funny because it'd be a big insult to say she sleepwalks through the movie, but she actually does. She is literally
she literally
sleepwalking
does.
as like a big part of her character in the film, and it makes such a huge contrast in that you've got this character all in white who's this ethereal girl who is like above, kind of untouchable in a way, and then she's mixed up in this incredibly gory murder mystery with all these bodies and crazy things happening. It's an interesting angle, and I can't imagine it with anybody else.
No,
she's perfect for her.
But another point, we talked a little bit about her, but could we just give a shout out to Daria Nicolodi, and how I love her, and I've loved every performance I've seen her in any of the Italian horror that we've been watching recently. But her performance in this, where she goes from being this sort of buttoned up, almost like librarian vibes, where everything is in its place and she has the glasses, she's very put up, to the scene in front of the pool of corpses where she is disheveled, her shirt is just sort of hanging open, her glasses are gone. It's like she's gone totally for broke, and I want to say that she is channeling some Mrs. Voorhees realness in this part, like just gone for broke, can't performance.
Yeah, 100%. And I love, she has that sort of very buttoned up kind of librarian sort of thing going on where she's just very stern, for the majority of the movie, and then she, they get to the house, and then her freak out starts kind of with the pill. She's like trying to give her the pill.
That scene is probably like the one that I don't quite gel with even now, because it's like it's a weird escalation from sort of like we're really friendly to like all of a sudden
take
the goddamn pill, basically.
Yeah,
and then she
take
goes,
the pill, and
bitch.
then she goes. There's that great scene where Jennifer Connelly comes into the room and sees what she thinks is the son, but it's a weird, very realistic doll. But Daria comes in and picks it up like super violently and holds it in front of her. Is like, you think this is a kid? You think this is my son? And she's like really angry, and you can tell how twisted she is. Yeah. So by the time she goes completely nuts, particularly at the end, with her face covered in, I didn't even know what's going on. I assume it's just like her skin has been torn apart. She's just maniacal. And I bet she just had a blast doing that.
She's on screen for like a total of 15, 20 minutes. And like 5 minutes of that, she looks like a librarian. Like the other 10, she's just like balls to the wall insanity. So that had to be fun. Yeah. You're like, oh, you just need me for a couple scenes, and in most of them I'm covered in blood and screaming. Sign me up. Sign me up.
Right. Yeah. No, she does. She's really great. And she's great in everything. But yeah, the minute she shows up in this, you're already kind of thinking, okay, where's she going? Because they're not going to just have her play this buttoned up lady. Like, she's going somewhere.
And boy, does she.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But I will say that, in my opinion, the real villain of Phenomena is Carl, Sophie's boyfriend, who she's supposed to be watching Jennifer. He gets her attention by pointing a light at the window. She gets dressed. She goes downstairs. She runs out to meet him. They start kissing. And then he's like, oh, I gotta go. I'm joining my regiment tomorrow. So you make me dress up. You make me come down to see you. You kiss me. And then you're saying I'm going to go. And now I'm dead because of you? Like, come on. That's rude.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. And how weird is it that he's like he's going with his army? Like, what
right.
I don't even know where that's coming from. It's the strangest
random
thing.
Moment.
Like, I can understand he's going to university, or he's going to another town to visit family, but he's going to meet his regiment and going off to what is he?
What war's going on, buddy? Like, what's going on?
Right, and aren't they in Switzerland? I thought they didn't even have an army.
Right. I don't know.
Amazing.
All things happen in the Swiss Transylvania. Isn't that what they call it?
Right.
They call it the Swiss Transylvania, which I love that name. It is phenomenal. Is there anything else you want to touch on about Phenomena before we give it a rating out of 5?
I wanted you to talk about, you had mentioned this in a text, Mary Beth, and then you kind of put it in our notes about true crime Elizabeth Thornberry.
Oh, Eliza Thornberry.
Eliza Thornberry.
Okay. So
I wanted to hear about this.
So, Keith, are you familiar with the show The Wild Thornberries?
I just familiar just by name, but haven't seen it.
Okay. So, I grew up with The Wild Thornberries. It's an animated TV show from Nickelodeon where a young girl and her family, like her parents are nature documentarians, and she and her sister go with them around the world in their RV. And Eliza Thornberry, the youngest, can talk to animals. So it's all about her like talking to animals and all over the world. And it was like my dream to be Eliza Thornberry. And so I was telling Terry that Jennifer is a true crime Eliza Thornberry because she just talks to bugs and solves crimes by talking to bugs. So it's like the goth true crime Eliza Thornberry.
Yeah,
it's such like a dumb reference, but
no, but that could be a show, right? Isn't that a great pitch? If like
right?
you have this detective, right, the kind of goth girl detective who, what's her in? It's like she talks to the flies that lay their eggs on corpses, so she can get a sense of like when the body was dumped and
right?
when the flies showed up, and they can give her intel and the worms. And yeah, you see, that could be something interesting.
I think could be too. There's already a comic book series called Chew where a guy is an FBI agent,
right.
and if he eats the piece of a dead body, he can figure out the crime. So there's obviously a appetite for it. So.
Yes.
The only other thing I would bring up is the fact that the bugs in this are really gross. The worms, in particular, are really disgusting.
And there's so many. I mean, yeah, he went for it, because that scene, particularly that one in the bathroom we talked about, where she vomits up the pill.
That made me want to gag. By the way,
maggots on the bar of soap, and then there's maggots on the washcloth, and it's not like he threw some rice on there. They're like maggots, like full on
big maggots, like juicy,
in macroscopic, with a, in full, living motion right there. And I love that he didn't skimp on the maggots and didn't skimp on any of the bugs.
So especially in the pool of nasty, was not a fan of that.
You want to see a pool of corpses? I'll show you a pool of corpses. I just imagine him like saying that in 1985, like, poltergeist.
Right, and anybody, right? Other directors might have just been like, okay, she goes in and then she climbs out, but he's like, no, she climbs in and falls back in.
She's stuck in there, like she's flailing.
Right, she's in there a long time
while the poor cop is breaking his hand.
Yes.
It's like so much happening in that moment.
There is a ton going on.
It's so good. On that note, shall we give this a rating out of 5?
Yes.
Our ratings out of 5. Terry, how many straight blade wielding chimpanzees out of 5 do you give Phenomena?
I will have to give it, I think, 4.5. Poor Inga, I just cut you in half. Straight razor wielding chimpanzees out of 5, because the more I see this movie, the more I'm just enamored with the way Dario Argento is going gonzo for broke with this. It feels like Argento is firing on all cylinders, bringing together the mysticism and magic of Suspiria with the black glove killer of his earlier Gialli. And it also, I feel like, from what I've seen, is sort of the peak of unfortunately the peak of his career, because everything else from there doesn't seem to have doesn't seem to get as much attention. But I think he is capping off almost 20 years of pure hits at this point. And so it might not be the most cohesive of his stories, and some of it might be a little silly, but it goes for broke in the only way a master of filmmaking can. And I think this movie is great. What about you, Mary Beth?
I agree. I also give it 4.5 straight razor wielding chimpanzees out of 5.
Say that 20 times.
I know. For all the reasons that you did, Terry, and this is one of the first Giallo movies I saw, and I think it just it wowed me, and it kind of I expected all other Giallo movies to be like this, and they're not, which is not a bad thing, but it is just so gorgeously shot, so ridiculous. So unabashedly itself, and Jennifer Connelly is a beautiful angel child in this movie. Keith, you have the final word. How many Ingas out of 5? I'm saying Inga now because I can't say it. How many Ingas out of 5 do you give?
I would agree with you guys. I think it's a 4.5 Inga movie for sure. I think it. Like you said, Terry, it is just. It's kind of Dario Argento at the peak of his powers. It's maybe not as intoxicating necessarily as Suspiria is, or it's not as kind of diabolically clever as Deep Red, or the Bird with Crystal Plumage. But it just weaves all of the stuff we love most about him into one film. And sure, that's not necessarily going to always work, and there are definitely rough patches. But the pieces that work are just so well made, so beautiful, and they're just so. It's hypnotic. It's really hard to. It's a movie that I always find when I turn it on, you can't turn it off. There's no like watching just a little bit of Phenomena and then putting it away.
Yeah.
You got to see the rest of it. You got to, because there's just so many highlights that you got to get through them. And I agree. It's definitely at that kind of peak. And afterwards, I think opera is very good too. But this was it in terms of. Certainly in terms of him hitting the supernatural and the Giallo thing at the same time.
I still need to see opera. I own it. I think I own it twice. I think I bought 2 different releases of it, but I haven't seen it yet. But I've always been meaning to.
You should definitely give it a watch. It is much more straightforward Giallo, but it's one of his goriest, which is saying a lot.
Wow.
But B, it is also, it kind of continues in some ways from Phenomena in terms of this very heightened experience. It takes place, right? Of course, it's called opera. It takes place in the opera house, and it is very sort of arch and kind of heightened in terms of this cast of characters. It also has the heavy metal music that plays during all the murders.
Yes.
It's definitely worth seeing. It for me, that's definitely kind of the final best of Argento. But Phenomena, I think, is hitting that peak in terms of just the visually and
pulling everything together, really
pulling it all together.
Well, thank you so much, Keith, for joining us to talk about Phenomena and the Vigil. Where can our listeners find you, and what do you have coming up you'd like to share?
So, next for me is Firestarter, and working very hard on pulling that together. And like I said, hopefully shooting it this year. And excited to kind of see the response and what people think of it. I recommend, everyone check out The Vigil. It'll be out February 26th, both in the U.S. and Canada. And you can, find it on demand. You can rent it wherever you rent things. And, if you're lucky enough to live near an open movie theater, there's a chance you can see it there as well. So hopefully people go and check it out, and hopefully they get some restless nights from it.
Yes, please. So listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with Phenomena? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you to everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Somebody please think of the children. Somebody please think of the children. Somebody please think of the children.
As a person with a very deep voice, I'm hired all the time for advertising campaigns. But a deep voice doesn't sell B2B, and advertising on the wrong platform doesn't sell B2B either. That's why if you're a B2B marketer, you should use LinkedIn ads. LinkedIn has the targeting capabilities to help you reach the world's largest professional audience. That's right, over 70 million decision makers all in one place. All the big wigs and medium wigs, also small wigs who are on the path to becoming big wigs. Okay, that's enough about wigs. LinkedIn ads allows you to focus on getting your B2B message to the right people. So, does that mean you should use ads on LinkedIn instead of hiring me, the man with the deepest voice in the world? Yes. Yes, it does. Get started today and see why LinkedIn is the place to be to be. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.